Welcome to START Secondary Transition Team-Paced Resources and Training. This key component is on planning for integrated competitive employment. I am Kelly Rogers. This is section 2 of a 4-section series, and this section is titled Looking at Autism Differently. Looking at autism differently is really digging in and understanding the predispositions that individuals with autism bring to help support their employment outcomes. We're going to cover these really 4 areas of predisposition, and then the attribution of behavior is more our response and our reactions to these predispositions. We're not going to talk about the strategies yet. That will be for section 4. So we're really just going to dig into what do we mean by these 4 areas of predisposition. First of all, theory of mind. Many individuals with autism have challenges with understanding the perspectives of other people. And it comes from this theory called theory of mind, which is really about our innate ability to recognize and understand the thoughts, beliefs, and desires of others, and be able to react and even predict what they might do. We do this so much, it's so innate in our development that we tend to do things like anthropomorphize, use that word tonight over dinner, inanimate objects. Will attribute human motivation and characteristics to things that are inanimate. Like we'll say things like, you know, my computer is not working with me today, or my GPS is, not being helpful for me today. And we'll attribute these emotions and characteristics that are human to these non-animate objects. Where many times, for many individuals with autism, they have a really difficult time attributing those same things to other people. So there's been a number of research studies in this area of perspective taking, and there's a group of studies that they've called the Sally Ann test, and there's a variety of different renditions of it. But for an example, one of the things that they would do is, they have these two students, Sally and Ann, and they have a whole group of individuals with autism watching this. But while they're both in the room, they put a marble in Sally's basket. And then they send Sally out of the room. And while she's out of the room, they move the marble from Sally's basket to Ann's box. And then they bring Sally back into the room, and they ask all the individuals with autism, where do you think Sally will look for her marble? And a vast majority of them will say Ann's box, because they didn't have a perspective that Sally wouldn't have seen that marble move. And so she will still be expecting the marble to be in her basket. And so it just really helps to demonstrate the sometimes very difficult time individuals with autism have in taking on that perspective. And we now have a number of neurological studies to show the parts of the brain that are impacted that result in us being able to have this skill or not. So that difficulty with theory of mind, or what we might call reciprocity, creates a number of challenges for individuals with autism. And the way we kind of explain it sometimes is, from their perspective, many of them, what I think, you think, what I believe to be true, you believe to be true, what I understand about what's going on right now, you understand about what's going on right now. And so it does create conflict in a number of areas of that social navigation. And one of them is, again, just not understanding that the perspectives of somebody else, but also problems inferring the intentions of others. I've had individuals say things like, why are you stalking me? The intention is I'm committing stalking, when really I just happen to be in the same place at the same time a number of times that day, or some version of that. Really difficult time predicting how others think or feel. So they tend to be, often the term that will be used is, well, they're so rude. Well, it's not that they're so rude, they're just saying what they believe and what they know, and yet without predicting how that might make somebody else feel. Sometimes difficulty understanding and responding to others' emotional states. So I've had families say things to me like, oh my word, we went to, Uncle John's funeral, and, he was laughing the whole time. That really not cueing in to other people's emotional states and mirroring, which we typically do, that state. Some problems with social conventions, such as turn taking or politeness, kind of talked about that already. Understanding social space, because again, all of these these social conventions really are predicated on the fact that we understand the perspective of the other person and know whether to say that thing or do that thing based on how they'll experience it. And if you have difficulty taking on that perspective, then you're just functioning on what you're thinking and feeling in the moment. Certainly people will say, well, he's manipulating me, and that's really difficult to do if you can't take on the perspective of someone else. And so that has more to do with our interpretation of their behavior than it is really exactly what they're doing. So again, we're not going to talk about the ways. In section 4, we're going to talk about the strategies for helping support someone who has challenges with theory of mind. We're just for this section, just talking about what those challenges are that are highly likely we might need to address in an employment setting. So the second predisposition that we may have to work through as we're designing environments to support employment is the predisposition of high interest areas. Some people might call these obsessions, that individuals, some, if many individuals on the autism spectrum have interest areas that really permeate every part of their thinking. It dominates their thinking and permeates every part of the way that they interact with the world. There's some research to suggest that this kind of explains when we talk about theory of mind from a developmental perspective, we're wired innately to become experts on people. Little kids, when, for example, if they fall, unless they're actually really hurt, the first thing they'll do is look to an adult to try to understand how to respond to that. And so they're seeking out other people's perspectives from very young, where when you struggle with those areas, and again, we have some neurological research now to show that the parts of the brain that process people in kids on the autism spectrum are the same parts of the brain that the rest of us process things. And so it's no wonder that they become experts on things, and that some of the rationale or explanation that could explain why these interest areas exist. There's also a lot of research on the potential functions of these high interest areas other than developmentally. It's just the brain is wired better for that. And again, we all have some of this. We all have interest areas. We all have things we use to serve certain functions. The difference is the intensity of it. For individuals with autism, it dominates their thinking, their conversations, their interactions with the world. It comes out everywhere. Where others use it for these functions, but can put it away and do other things and have other conversations about other topics and those kinds of things. But these are just some potential functions based in research that those things may serve. And again, this will be helpful for us when we talk about strategies in section 4 for helping individuals manage these high interest areas. So they may serve to overcome anxiety. So if you see higher rates of talking about that thing or trying to access that thing, may be an indication that the student's experiencing some anxiety. It may just be something fun to do. And again, we all have that, but it's about how teaching where and when we can access those things that bring us pleasure. It could just provide relaxation. And again, we all have things that we're into that help us relax. It's a matter of knowing that where and when. There's some line of research that suggests, individuals with autism are daily trying to navigate a very unpredictable social world, and that having these predictable things that have the same component parts or the same facts that go with them, whether it be science or technology, that brings a level of predictability and certainty to their world. May help them understand the physical world or create an alternative world. Again, we all sometimes want to escape to somewhere that's calmer and warmer, perhaps, and these interest areas may serve that for them. It may help them create a sense of identity. This is who I am, and I know a lot about these particular things. Certainly could be occupying time. I mean, I always look, if they're really digging into their preferred interest, what are they supposed to be doing? And is what are they supposed to be doing age appropriate? Is it of sufficient, difficulty so that it has some learning potential to it? Or is it just simply boring because you're going to go do something else and something to just occupy your time, play Candy Crush, whatever that is, if what you're expected to do is that boring? So again, part of this looking at potential functions as we're thinking about employment is how do we use the information about high interest areas to help know what's happening in the environment so that we can put in supports. The third predisposition that we're going to talk about is pairing and making associations. And pairing and making associations comes from learning theory, comes from all the research in the areas of applied behavioral analysis, but it's how we learn about the world around us, how we, from very early on, developmentally, interact with the world in certain ways, and depending on what happens when we interact with the world will determine whether or not we'll do that again. So you think about little kids who turn the lights on and off over and over again. They're making that pairing and association. There's a light switch, I flip it up, and look what happens. A light comes on. And so the next time I want a light on, I'm going to know to flip that switch up. Same thing with down. So they're playing always with a lens to how do I learn about the world around me. Same thing would be with the hot stove, right? That, I see food on the stove, it smells good, so I'm going to touch it, and I'm touching the stove and it's very hot, and I learn very quickly, never going to do that again. I'm not going to get near the stove again. And so pairing and making associations is all about how we learn about the world around us. The challenge is that for many individuals with autism, and again, some of it comes because they aren't necessarily reading all of the cues in the environment, all the social cues in the environment, and they end up making faulty associations and treat those faulty associations as truth about the world. And for some individuals, it can be a one-time trial, like it happened one time, and then that's the truth about the world. And so here's a prime example, that we see often in school, find X. And it's like, well, come on, they have to read through that's not what that means. Well, what does it take to read through what that actually means? It requires reciprocity. It requires theory of mind. I have to think through the lens of the person who put this problem on the paper. Where from a person, with autism, what it might look like is, wow, are they that dumb? Like, this seems like a really easy one. And of course, they're circling it like it's right there. And, maybe they're thinking through, there must be some freebies. There's some of these items are just free points. And people will say to us all the time, well, why don't they raise their hand and ask? Well, again, if what I believe to be true is what they believe to be true, then I'm not going to raise my hand and ask. I'm going to presume that it's an easy question. It's just an easy one, right? And so those are, some examples of those faulty associations. Here's a couple more. These faulty associations can occur in terms of language or phrases as well. You can see that. So for example, we had a teacher who the student learned that there was going to be a fire alarm that day, and he was having sort of a meltdown, and the teacher's like, you don't need to worry, because when the fire alarm goes off, you're going to be outside. And she was trying to tell him, we're going to go out before the fire alarm goes off. But meaning goes on. That's how we say it. And so he kept saying, I don't want to be outside when the fire alarm goes off. I want to be outside when the fire alarm goes on. And so you can see that kind of faulty association. This was another one where the student couldn't find the book that they were looking for, and the library had shown that it was there, and yet it wasn't where it was supposed to be, and it was time to go back to class. So the teacher said, well, you go back to class and we'll look for you. And he said, I don't want you looking for me. I want you looking for the book. So you can see sometimes when you dig in about where those faulty associations are. And because of those, sometimes, again, there's conflict. Their understanding of what's supposed to be happening is different than what is actually happening. And so it creates dissonance and anxiety. And so one of the things you'll see happen often because of those faulty associations is making some rigid rules. We had a student once that would, have a complete meltdown when their parent took, a left turn, and, would just have a panic attack. Well, they had watched a news story where research shows that individuals more accidents occur when people are making left turns than right turns. So his association is then you make no left turns. Had a colleague of mine that a student she was working with kind of had organized people in 3 ways. You're either a jock, you're people that don't make good decision, or your friends. And again, sometimes you can't track these things down where they come from, but sometimes you can. Sometimes they come from a TV show or a video game or a movie of some kind where there's like a situation where everybody was organized like this, for an example. And from that point on, I made that association as that's how you categorize people. And so you're in one of those 3 categories. So passing 4 red cars means it's a good day, and that's because 3 days in a row on the way to school they passed 4 red cars, and voila, the student had a good day. So they made that association. And again, that might be 2 or 3 days that it took to make that association, but not for many individuals with autism. It can be one day we passed 4 red cars and the day was good. So from now on, we need to pass 4 red cars before I can go to school, because that's what makes a good day. Same thing with the kid we were working with, that on this particular day, he used the blue gel pen and he got an A on his assignment. So from now on, I'm going to use the blue gel pen. Now, we all have some of this because, again, go to a bingo hall where people have all of their little gadgets because they won bingo on the day they had that gadget. So now it's, got these special powers. We all make those associations, but the difference is for many individuals with autism, those associations are rigid rules and they are facts and they are truth from their perspective. And so again, we have to understand that thinking so that we can use it when needed in developing supports for employment. The 4th area has to do with executive functioning, and this really is predicated on the functioning of our brains. And so typically executive function challenges occur in what's called the cerebrum or the cerebral cortex, and it does impact ability to reason, plan, problem solving, make judgments about what we should and shouldn't do, and organize our thoughts, organize our actions. And some of the strengths actually for individuals with autism, they have a number of executive functioning strengths. They tend to be able to process whole chunks of information very, very quickly. And again, like we talked about in previous sessions, these are the kinds of things that employers are seeking out because there's strengths in these areas. Often have great rote memory and long-term memory. Often are very skilled at processing visual information very quickly and meaningfully, and can understand and use context-free information and rules. So if it's a rule, it's going to be applied, potentially for some individuals, applied everywhere. This is the rule. And it doesn't matter. There's not the social nuance like, well, I wonder if I can, not do this in this period of time, given all of this context. You're going to have sort of that context-free, this is the rule or this is the expectation or not. Some of the challenges, however, is that many individuals with autism have difficulty rapidly and accurately shifting their attention. Sometimes they have challenges processing 2 cognitive tasks simultaneously. And it's interesting because for individuals who can describe this, they'll describe being in the social world as a cognitive task. Cognitive tasks are things that take a lot of cognitive energy. Associative tasks are things that we can do many of at the same time. And our brains are often wired for those associative tasks. We can get dressed in the morning and be totally getting dressed and not using any cognitive energy, and we're just watching the news and using all of our cognition to process the news. And we can get totally dressed and not really remember getting dressed because those are those associative tasks. Well, many individuals with autism will describe just being in the social world, having to navigate what other people are doing and potentially thinking is a cognitive task because it's so difficult with that theory of mind and other skills. And so they're already cognitively tasked just with that. And now we're adding other work tasks on top of that. And so we have to understand that doing two or more things that require a lot of cognition may be very challenging for some. Difficult time generalizing information to other environments. So if it's true in this environment, it's only true in this environment and not in that environment is sometimes the thinking for some individuals. Retrieving information on demand. So they may need time to process before they can retrieve that information. And at times we see some of this cognitive inflexibility, difficulty with change, or what we might call insistence on sameness. So transitions can be challenging. They want things to be the same every day, the schedule to look the same. Difficulty with, on the spot, flexible routines. If something changes, like, whoops, we're not going to do this task today, we're doing this task instead, that can be really challenging for some kids, individuals, young adults, like we're talking about. They may have concrete thinking. And so I kind of showed some examples a minute ago about some of the language that could be very, very concrete. And so if we're using a lot of sarcasm or things like that, it might be difficult for them to understand. Letting go of things, letting go of thoughts and ideas, that they have to get resolution for those things before they can sort of move on. And sometimes this over focus on details, we call that weak central coherence, but they over focus on details and less focus on like the bigger picture or the overall picture. This is one example when the teacher is reading this book aloud to the kids and the student says, wow, do you see that deer? And the rest of us are looking around like, deer, where's the deer? I don't see the deer. You don't even notice the deer. And does the deer even have anything to do with the story or the picture here? And so, but if you look down on the bottom right-hand side, just under the tree, you can see the deer laying there. And so you see that kind of over focus on these minute details without the bigger picture or bigger context of what the situation is about. And this can come through in a variety of ways. So then finally, the fifth area is not a predisposition of individuals with autism at all. It's a strategy for us in addressing these predispositions of individuals with autism. And it really comes from what we call attribution theory, and it's to what do we attribute other people's behavior? And we do this every day. We guess how people will act. Sometimes from very small pieces of information, we'll make attributions about what they're going to do and why they're going to do that. And it's, we call that a social cognition, if you will, and use the word attribution. And as we observe others, again, we make inferences all the time about what they're doing and why they're doing it. And sometimes we're pretty accurate. Sometimes we can be wrong. But we, no matter whether we're right or wrong, what we conclude about the attribution of their behavior affects how we react and respond to them. When we are wrong, we tend to commit what we call the fundamental attribution error. And it's human nature. It comes from all the research in attribution theory. But what it is this erroneous cognitive tendency of ourselves to overvalue in others, especially when it's a negative characteristic. We overvalue their internal characteristics as being an explanation for their behavior, and undervalue the potential that situation explanations could explain their actions or their behavior. And we do the reverse for ourselves, especially when it comes to negative characteristics. And so if you read the statement at the bottom, we predominantly presume that the actions of others are indicative of the kind of person they are, rather than the kind of situations that compel their behavior. And so it's important to know that though this entire section was about the predispositions of individuals, and that for individuals with autism, many of those things are their natural tendencies to do, that our reaction to those are because we just presume that that's unchangeable, that the environment is playing no impact on the outwardly expression of these characteristics. And so it's important for us to keep a tab on, or a lens of, being careful to not commit that fundamental attribution error, and know that though these may be predispositions of individuals with autism, they are amenable to support that can help them manage those challenges. Okay, so wrapping up, if you'll take a minute and jot down what your most important points were of this section 2. And the next section that you will participate in is section 3 on high expectations and presuming competence. And I want to thank you so much for your engagement during this session.